The stars had belonged to the conclave for 11,000 years. 12 species, united not by friendship but by mutual benefit, controlled every trade route, every habitable world, and every resource-rich asteroid field in the Orion Arm. Their rule was absolute. Their methods were perfect. And when humanity first sent radio signals into the void, the conclave barely noticed. Earth was just another primitive world among millions. The species that crawled across its surface were unremarkable in every way that mattered to the great powers of the galaxy. Humans were weak. Humans were divided. Humans had not even left their own solar system. They were studied briefly and then filed away under a category that translated roughly to future labor stock. Commander knew all of this. She had spent 15 years learning it, piece by piece, from her cramped office aboard the human embassy station. The station itself was a joke, really. A handful of rooms bolted together at the edge of neutral space, tolerated by the conclave the way a great beast might tolerate a fly buzzing near its ear. Not worth the effort to swat, at least not yet. Was 47 years old, with gray streaking through her black hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. She had been a soldier once, before the diplomatic corps recruited her. They said she had a gift for seeing patterns where others saw chaos. She was not sure if that was true, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: humanity was running out of time. She stood at the observation window of her office, watching a conclave cruiser drift past in the distance. The ship was beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful. Sleek lines, hidden weapons, and the quiet confidence of something that had never known a true challenge. The cruiser did not even acknowledge the human station as it passed. Why would it? Humans were beneath notice. The door chimed behind her. Turned as her assistant, a young man named, stepped inside with a data tablet clutched to his chest. "The integration protocols have been finalized," said. His voice was steady but could see the fear in his eyes. "The Conclave Council approved them this morning. Unanimous vote." Took the tablet and scrolled through the document. She had expected this. She had been expecting it for years, but seeing the words on the screen still sent a cold wave through her stomach. Integration protocols for species 7421. That was what humanity was to the conclave. A number. The protocols were detailed and thorough. Phase 1 involved economic restructuring, which meant the conclave would take control of all human trade and industry. Phase 2 was cultural harmonization, which meant the slow erasure of human languages, customs, and history. Phase 3 was population management, which meant exactly what it sounded like. "How long?" asked. "They want to begin implementation within 2 years, said. "Maybe sooner." Set the tablet down on her desk. Through the window, the conclave cruiser had disappeared into the darkness between stars. In 2 years, ships like that one would be orbiting Earth. Not to attack, not at first. The conclave did not waste resources on destruction when absorption was cheaper. They would simply strangle humanity slowly, cutting off every path to growth until there was nothing left to do but submit. She thought about the delegations she had watched come and go over the years. Diplomats and politicians, scientists and generals, all of them brilliant in their own ways. All of them had failed. They had tried reason, and the conclave had laughed at them. They had tried bargaining, and the conclave had taken everything offered while giving nothing in return. They had tried threats, and the conclave had not even bothered to respond. The problem, had realized long ago, was that humanity was playing a game it did not understand. The conclave had been playing this game for 11,000 years. They had refined their strategies against hundreds of species. They knew every move, every countermove, every desperate gambit a trapped species might attempt. Humanity could not win by being smarter or stronger or more determined. The conclave had seen all of that before. The only way to win was to stop playing the game entirely. "I need to speak with the council," said, directly, in person. Stared at her, "The United Council on Earth." "Yes." "Commander, the travel time alone is 3 months each way, and with the situation here." The situation here is already lost, said. She picked up the tablet again and handed it back to. We have been losing for 15 years. We just did not know it until now. I need to go home. I need to show them something. It took 4 months to arrange the journey. Spent the time gathering every piece of information she could from the embassy's databases, trade agreements, military reports, cultural studies, diplomatic transcripts. She everything onto a single encrypted drive and kept it with her at all times. The trip back to Earth was long and quiet. Spent most of it alone in her cabin, reviewing the data she had collected. She organized it, analyzed it, and looked for patterns that others might have missed. By the time the transport ship entered Earth's solar system, she had the outline of a plan forming in her mind. It was not a good plan. It was possibly the worst plan in human history, but it was the only plan that had any chance of working. Earth looked different from orbit, smaller somehow, more fragile. The blue-green marble hung in the void, wrapped in thin wisps of cloud, utterly defenseless against the forces gathering beyond its borders. Watched through the transport's window as they descended through the atmosphere. The United Council met in Geneva, in a building that had once housed the old United Nations before humanity learned it was not alone in the universe. The council chamber was circular, with tiered seating rising around a central platform. Representatives from every nation on Earth sat in those seats, their faces tense and worried. They had all read the integration protocols. They all knew what was coming. Stood on the central platform, feeling the weight of their stares. She had never been comfortable with public speaking. She preferred to work behind the scenes, analyzing and planning, letting others take the spotlight. But this was too important to trust to anyone else. I have been asked to provide a strategic assessment of humanity's situation, she began. Her voice echoed in the chamber, amplified by hidden speakers. I will not waste your time with false hope. The situation is bad. The conclave intends to absorb humanity completely within the next decade. They will not negotiate. They will not show mercy. And by any conventional measure, we cannot stop them. The chamber was silent, could see the despair settling onto the faces around her. Good. They needed to understand how bad things were before they could understand what needed to be done. The conclave has been doing this for 11,000 years, she continued. They have conquered or absorbed over 300 species. They have developed strategies for every possible response. If we fight, they will crush us. If we run, they will hunt us down. If we hide, they will find us. Every path leads to the same destination. She paused, letting her words sink in. Every conventional path, she said. But there is one strategy they have never encountered, one approach that no species in the history of the conclave has ever attempted. I believe it is the only thing that can save us. A representative from China leaned forward in her seat. What strategy? Took a deep breath. This was the moment that would determine everything. Either the council would think she was insane, or they would give her what she needed. I call it strategic transparency, she said. We stop hiding, we stop pretending. We reveal everything, every secret, every weakness, every fear. We become completely, absolutely, totally honest, not just about ourselves, about everything we know about the conclave as well. The chamber erupted in confusion. Representatives shouted questions and objections. Guards moved toward the platform, unsure if had lost her mind. But she stood perfectly still, waiting for the noise to die down. The conclave's power is built on secrets, she said, once the chamber had quieted enough to hear her. Every species hides its true strength from the others. Every alliance is based on careful deception. They have maintained their unity for 11,000 years by ensuring that no one knows the full truth about anyone else. What I am proposing is simple. We turn on the lights. We show everyone everything. And we watch what happens when a system built on darkness is suddenly exposed to the sun. The debate lasted for 3 days. Experts were called in to analyze the proposal. Military leaders warned that exposing humanity's weaknesses would invite immediate attack. Diplomats argued that no species would ever trust humans again. Psychologists questioned whether had cracked under the pressure of her posting. But in the end, the council had no better options. The integration protocols were coming. Conventional resistance was impossible. And its plan, as insane as it sounded, was the only proposal that offered any hope at all. On the fourth day, the United Council voted. The margin was narrow, but it was enough. Was authorized to implement strategic transparency. She returned to the embassy station with a new mandate and a small team of specialists. The work began immediately. They compiled every piece of intelligence humanity had gathered over the past 15 years. Military capabilities, economic data, political structures, and most importantly, the secrets that the Conclave's 12 species had been hiding from each other for. When everything was ready, sat down at her terminal and began to type. The message would be broadcast on every frequency the Conclave monitored. It would reach every species, every world, every ship in the Orion Arm. There would be no going back. She thought about Earth, small and fragile, hanging in the void. She thought about the children who would grow up under Conclave rule if she failed. She thought about the species that had been erased before humanity, their names and histories lost to time. Then she pressed send. The first transmission was nothing more than raw data. Numbers and charts and reports, all of it stripped of diplomatic language and presented in cold, clinical terms. Released everything that humanity had tried so hard to keep hidden from the Conclave. Military strength, minimal. Fleet size, negligible. Defensive capabilities, virtually non-existent. Resource reserves, enough for perhaps 5 years of sustained resistance. Population, 8 billion, concentrated on a single planet with no significant off-world colonies. It was a complete and total confession of weakness. Every secret that humanity's leaders had guarded with paranoid intensity was now floating through space for anyone to read. The transmission reached the nearest Conclave relay station within hours, and from there it spread outward like ripples in a pond. Watched the data monitors as the message propagated across the network. She could imagine the confusion it must be causing. The Conclave's intelligence services had spent centuries developing sophisticated methods for extracting secrets from other species. They had never encountered a species that simply gave those secrets away. The response came 3 days later, not from the Conclave Council but from the Directorate, one of the 12-member species. Their message was short and suspicious. They demanded to know what humanity was planning. This had to be a trick, some elaborate deception designed to lure the Conclave into a trap. Replied with more data, technical specifications for human weapons systems, detailed maps of Earth's defensive installations, psychological profiles of key political and military leaders. She answered every question before it was asked, providing information so complete that no rational being would ever share it voluntarily. The Conclave's intelligence networks went into overdrive. Analysts from all 12 species pored over the transmissions, searching for hidden codes, false information, or any sign of deception. They found nothing. The data was accurate down to the smallest detail. Humanity was exactly as weak as the transmissions suggested. But was not finished. The second transmission went out 1 week after the first. This time, the data was not about humanity. It was about the Conclave itself. Had spent 15 years at the embassy, watching and listening and recording. She had built relationships with low-level officials from various species. She had gathered fragments of information from trade negotiations, diplomatic functions, and casual conversations. Piece by piece, she had assembled a picture of the Conclave that no single species possessed. Now she shared it all. The hegemony had been secretly expanding their military manufacturing capacity for the past century. Their official fleet numbers were accurate, but their production facilities could triple that number within 5 years. They had been preparing for a war that had not yet begun. The Directorate had been manipulating currency exchanges across conclave space, siphoning wealth from their trading partners through complex financial instruments that no one else fully understood. Their economic power was far greater than their official assessments suggested. The collective had been running covert operations against the coalition for decades, sabotaging industrial facilities and assassinating key researchers. The two species publicly maintained cordial relations, but beneath the surface, they had been systematically undermining technological development. And so it went. Secret after secret, betrayal after betrayal, revealed everything she knew about the hidden conflicts that simmered beneath the conclave's unified facade. She addressed the information not to the Council, but to each species individually, ensuring that everyone learned about everyone else's deceptions simultaneously. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Within days, diplomatic channels that had been stable erupted in accusation and counter-accusation. The demanded explanations from the recalled their ambassadors from space. Emergency sessions were called, then canceled, then called again as representatives struggled to process the flood of information. The conclave had always operated on a simple principle: trust no one, but pretend to trust everyone. Each species knew that the others were hiding something, but the specific details remained safely obscure. The system worked because ignorance preserved the illusion of cooperation. Had shattered that illusion. She watched from her office as the reports came in. Fleet movements along the border, trade sanctions imposed without warning, diplomatic missions expelled from host worlds. The careful balance that had held the conclave together for 11,000 years was beginning to crack. Came to her office on the 9th day, his face pale with a mixture of fear and amazement. "The Council is in chaos," he said. "3 species have withdrawn their representatives for consultations. The end are openly accusing each other of economic warfare, and no one knows what to do about us anymore." Nodded, "They cannot decide if we are a threat or distraction." "Good." "Good," stared at her. "Commander, we just made ourselves the most hated species in the galaxy. When they finish fighting each other, they will come for us." "Perhaps," said, "but look at what we have gained. For the first time in 15 years, the conclave is not focused on humanity. They are focused on each other. Every ship they move to watch their neighbors is a ship that is not moving toward Earth. Every resource they spend on internal disputes is a resource they cannot use against us." She turned back to the window. In the distance, she could see conclave ships moving in formations that made no strategic sense. They were not preparing for an external threat. They were repositioning against each other. "We bought time," said. "Now we need to use it." The third transmission was different from the first two. It contained no secrets, no intelligence, no hidden information. It was simply a message, broadcast openly to every species in the conclave. Had written it herself, choosing each word with care. "We are humanity," the message began. "We are weak. We have shown you exactly how weak we are. We have no hidden strength, no secret weapons, no allies waiting to rescue us. We are alone and we are defenseless. But we have also shown you what we can see. We have watched you for 15 years. We have learned your secrets, not through force or deception, but simply by paying attention. We understand you better than you understand each other. You built your conclave on secrets. You told yourselves that unity came from shared interests, but it did not. It came from shared ignorance. None of you knew what the others were really doing, so you could pretend that you were all working together. Now you know, now you all know, and you have to decide what happens next. We do not ask for mercy. We do not beg for survival. We simply offer you a choice. You can destroy humanity for revealing the truth. You can burn our world and scatter our ashes across the void, but you will still have to live with what you have learned about each other. Or you can ask yourselves a different question. If a weak, primitive species could see through your deception so easily, What does that say about the foundations of your power? What else have you been blind to? What other truths are waiting to be discovered? We are humanity. We turned on the lights. What you do next is up to you. The message ended there. Did not add threats or promises. She did not suggest alliances or negotiations. She simply let the words stand on their own. For 3 days, there was no response at all. The conclave's internal conflicts continued to escalate. Border skirmishes broke out between the end. The coalition formally severed all ties with the collective. Two smaller species, caught between the larger powers, began preparing for war. And then on the fourth day, the first shot was fired. It was a patrol vessel, intercepting what it believed to be a spy ship near a disputed asteroid field. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. Both ships were destroyed. 73 beings died. It was not much by the standards of galactic warfare, but it was enough. The conclave had kept the peace for 11,000 years. Now the peace was broken. Received word of the engagement from her monitoring systems. She read the report twice, then set it down and stared out the window. "It has begun," she said quietly. Was standing behind her, his hands trembling slightly. "What happens now?" Did not answer immediately. She thought about the 73 beings who had just died. She thought about the thousands, perhaps millions, who would follow. She had known this might happen. She had planned for it. But knowing and seeing were different things. "Now," she said finally, "we wait, and we hope that what comes after is better than what came before." The war that followed would reshape the galaxy, but that was a story for another time. The war lasted 3 years. It was not a single conflict, but rather a cascade of smaller wars that fed into each other, growing larger and more destructive with each passing month. The conclave, which had stood united for 11,000 years, tore itself apart with a speed that surprised even. She watched it all from the embassy station, which had become something of a sanctuary in the chaos. The conclave's member species were too busy fighting each other to spare resources for a backwater outpost occupied by a primitive species. Human ships slipped through war zones without being challenged. Human traders found new markets among factions desperate for supplies that their former allies would no longer provide. Humanity, forgotten in the violence, began to grow. The first major battle came 6 months after the initial skirmish. The N had been building toward full-scale war since the revelations about their respective military preparations. When it finally erupted, the conflict consumed 3 star systems in a matter of weeks. Billions died. Entire worlds were rendered uninhabitable, and the other conclave species, rather than intervening to restore peace, used the opportunity to settle their own grievances. Received regular reports from human observers scattered throughout conclave space. The pattern was always the same. Species that had cooperated turned on each other the moment the illusion of mutual trust was broken. Old hatreds, carefully suppressed under the weight of enforced unity, exploded to the surface. It was as if the conclave had been a pressure vessel, building tension for 11,000 years, and had simply removed the cap. She did not sleep well during those years. The faces of the dead haunted her dreams, though she never knew their names. She had made a choice, and that choice had consequences measured in the millions. No amount of rationalization could make that weight easier to bear. Found her one night in her office, staring at casualty reports. "You saved us," he said. "You know that, right? Whatever happens, humanity survives because of what you did." Did not look up from the reports. "I saved humanity by destroying everything else. Do you think that makes me a hero or a monster?" Had no answer. By the end of the first year, 4 species had been effectively eliminated from the galactic stage. Their populations were not completely destroyed, but their military and economic capabilities had been reduced to insignificance. They became refugees, scattered across neutral zones and contested territories, begging for protection from former enemies. By the end of the second year, 2 more species followed. The great fleets that had once patrolled conclave space were now shattered wrecks drifting between the stars. Industrial worlds that had produced goods for thousands of years lay silent and burning. Trade networks that had connected hundreds of systems collapsed entirely. And through it all, humanity watched and waited. Sent orders to human leadership during this time, though she was careful never to put her full strategy in writing. She encouraged Earth to expand quietly, claiming worlds that no one else was paying attention to. She pushed for the development of self-sufficient colonies, places where human civilization could survive even if Earth itself was lost. She built networks of contacts among the warring species, offering aid and assistance without asking for anything in return. When pressed for her reasons, she gave the same answer every time: "We are preparing for what comes after." The end came in the third year, not with a final battle but with a collective exhaustion. The surviving species, reduced to fragments of their former glory, simply stopped fighting. They had nothing left to fight with. Their fleets were gone. Their economies were in ruins. Their populations were decimated. The war had burned itself out like a fire that had consumed all available fuel. In the silence that followed, 8 of the original 12 species had been reduced to remnant populations. 2 had been completely destroyed. They're now nothing more than radioactive debris fields. The remaining 2, the and the, had retreated to their home systems and sealed their borders against all contact. They watched each other with paranoid intensity, each convinced that the other was waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. The conclave, which had ruled the Orion Arm for 11,000 years, was gone. Received the final intelligence assessments on a gray morning, 230 days after the last shot was fired. She read them in her office, alone, while the station hummed quietly around her. The reports confirmed what she had already suspected. The power vacuum left by the conclave's collapse was immense. Hundreds of star systems that had once been under strict control were now ungoverned. Resources that had been carefully allocated were now available to whoever could claim them first. The infrastructure of galactic civilization remained largely intact, waiting for new masters. And humanity, small and weak and barely noticed, was suddenly the only species in a position to fill that void. Set down the reports and walked to the window. The stars looked the same as they always had, cold and distant and indifferent, but she knew that everything had changed. The paths that had been closed to humanity for so long were now open. The barriers that had held them back had crumbled into dust. She thought about the plan she had made so many years ago, in a cramped cabin on a transport ship heading back to Earth. She had known even then that it would work, not because she was brilliant, but because she had understood something fundamental about the conclave that its members had never understood about themselves. Their power was built on secrets. Every alliance, every treaty, every carefully maintained relationship depended on ignorance. The member species did not trust each other. They did not even like each other in many cases, but they cooperated because the alternative seemed worse, and because none of them truly knew what the others were capable of. Had changed that. She had given them knowledge, and knowledge had destroyed them. It was not a kind strategy. It was not a noble strategy. It was simply the only strategy that could work for a species with nothing to lose and no other options. The door chimed. Turned to find standing in the entrance, older now, with gray in his own hair. "The council wants to speak with you," he said. "They are preparing a formal address to the survivors. They want you to write it." Shook her head. "I have said everything I needed to say. Let someone else speak now." Hesitated. "They also want to know what happens next. Everyone does. You are the one who saw all of this coming. What do you see now?" Considered the question for a long moment. She thought about the empty systems waiting to be claimed. She thought about the species that had survived, wounded and wary, watching humanity with new eyes. She thought about the responsibility that came with power and the dangers that waited for any species that forgot where it came from. "We spread," she said finally. Carefully, slowly, without the arrogance that destroyed the conclave. We build alliances with the survivors, not through deception or coercion, but through genuine cooperation. We remember that we were once weak, and we treat the weak with respect. And we never, ever forget that secrets are poison. Nodded slowly. And what about you? What will you do? Turned back to the window. In the distance, she could see the first human colonization fleet preparing for departure. Dozens of ships, carrying thousands of people, heading toward worlds that had never known human footsteps. I will watch, she said. I will remember, and I will make sure we do not become what we destroyed. She stayed at the embassy station for another decade, long after it stopped being an embassy and became a museum. Visitors came from all over human space to see the place where strategic transparency had been launched. They walked through her old office and stared at her old terminal, the one she had used to send the messages that changed everything. Avoided these visitors when she could. She did not want to be treated as a hero. Heroes were supposed to feel proud of what they had accomplished, and she felt only a quiet, persistent guilt that never quite went away. But she also knew that she had done what needed to be done. Humanity had been facing extinction, and she had found a way out. The cost had been terrible, but the alternative would have been worse. She had to believe that. She had to, or the weight of it would crush her. On the 20th anniversary of the conclave's fall, a delegation from the coalition requested a meeting with humanity's leaders. It was the first official contact from either of the surviving major species since the war's end. They wanted to discuss trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and the possibility of joining a new coalition of species, one built on different principles than the conclave. Was asked to attend the meeting, though she refused any formal role. She sat in the back of the chamber and watched as human and diplomats began the slow, careful work of building something new. The ambassador, a tall being with iridescent scales and multifaceted eyes, noticed her during a break in the negotiations. It crossed the room and stood before her, studying her with an expression she could not read. "You are commander," it said, "the one who turned on the lights." Met its gaze. "That is what they call it." "We have studied your strategy extensively," the ambassador said. "It was brilliant. It was also ruthless. Many of my people hate you for what you did. They lost family, friends, entire communities because of your transmissions." "I know," said. "I am sorry for their loss." The ambassador's scales shifted color, cycling through patterns that did not understand. "But others among us have come to a different conclusion. They believe that you did us a service, though we did not recognize it at the time. You showed us what we truly were. You forced us to confront the lies we had been telling ourselves for." "And what did you learn?" The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then it extended one long, scaled hand in a gesture that recognized as a sign of respect. "We learned that we were not as strong as we believed. We learned that unity built on deception is no unity at all. We learned that the truth, however painful, is better than a comfortable lie. These are hard lessons, but perhaps necessary ones." Took the offered hand. The ambassador's grip was cool and dry, utterly alien but somehow comforting. "I hope," she said, "that we can build something better together." The ambassador inclined its head. "So do we, Commander, so do we." The negotiations continued for many months, but in the end, a new alliance was formed. It was smaller than the conclave and more modest in its ambitions. It was also more honest. The member species shared information freely, without the secrecy that had poisoned the old order. They built their cooperation on a foundation of truth rather than ignorance. Lived long enough to see the first generation of humans born into this new galaxy. Children who grew up knowing that the stars were open to them, that no ancient power would stand in their way. They learned about the conclave in history classes, and about the human who had brought it down with nothing more than the truth. Most of them did not understand what that truth had cost, and hoped they never would. She died on a quiet afternoon in her 93rd year, sitting in a garden on a world that had not existed when she was born. A world that humans had built from nothing, one of hundreds that now carried humanity's presence across the Orion Arm. Her last words, recorded by an attendant who thought they might be important, were simple. "All I did was turn on the lights. What we built afterward, that was the real work." In the years that followed became a legend. Stories about her grew and changed, and until the real woman was nearly lost beneath the myth. Some called her a hero, others called her a monster, most simply called her the one who changed everything. But those who had known her, who had watched her work and worried and sacrifice over those long years at the embassy station, remembered something different. They remembered a woman who had seen no good options and chosen the least bad one. A woman who had carried the weight of her decisions without complaint, knowing that the alternative was worse. They remembered a woman who had saved humanity not through strength or cunning, but through the simple, devastating act of telling the truth. And that, in the end, was the story that mattered.